Hello everyone, the Nitro Storm here, and in honor of No Way Home's recent release, and also the fact that it is almost Christmas, I am going to be giving you guys the full, complete series of What If Harry Became Spider-Man, and I just wanted to drop this for you guys because also I haven't uploaded in like forever. But yeah guys, so this is just going to include all 8 parts in one video, and I hope you guys enjoy it, so here we go.
Alright, so beginning with the initial change. Harry getting bitten by the spider. Now we all know during the field trip scene that Peter asked MJ to take a picture. However, this time I would want him to also ask afterward to take a picture with Harry, since the two have been best friends for a long time. He agrees, and the spider would come down from its web and land on Harry, biting him. After that, we would get the Norman military scene, and then nothing changes there, so we would move on to Peter arriving home to have dinner with his Uncle Ben and Aunt May, since he wouldn't feel sick, as he only felt sick because of the spider bite. We get a short little scene of them saying grace before we cut to Harry walking in the door and walking by the fridge. There, Harry would see a note that reads, "Working late again, Norman." Harry would rip the note off and walk into his room where he pins the note onto a board with all the others just like it. This would show how big the difference between Harry and his father is, as Norman is gone many times and only writes just a few words without even signing "Love Dad" or anything like that. Just Norman. Harry then begins stumbling around his room until he falls onto his bed, covering himself up and rolling onto the ground just like Peter did in canon. Then after the lab scene with Norman happens, finally becoming the Green Goblin, we'd then cut to Peter waking up and seeing MJ in the window, but there would be no big change. After that, everything else would play out the same way with him missing the bus. Harry would wake up and go outside his room to find his dad on the ground. He would help him up and ask if he's okay. His father would then of course say that he doesn't remember what he was doing last night, and then he would be told by the random dudes that the scientist with him last night died. The flight suit and glider would also be reported stolen, and Harry would try to comfort his father by walking up to him and trying to walk him to his room. During this, Norman would take a look at his arm and ask if he's been working out. Harry then looks to his arm and sees, along with the audience, that he is completely jacked. We then move on into the next scene where Peter is just eating his lunch when he sees MJ slip just like in canon. He goes to try and catch her, but fails this time, ending up falling alongside her. Without the spider powers, he would completely embarrass himself by doing this. Flash sees this and watches as Peter runs out of the cafeteria, having been embarrassed. He didn't really have much confidence before he got bitten by the spider, and so since he isn't being bitten by the spider at all, he really still doesn't have as much. But because he cares about MJ so much, he actually tries to do something, and it just ends up blowing up in his face. Or, at least for now. Anyway, Flash helps MJ up, and says that if it were him, he would have caught her. MJ then replies that at least he tried, and Flash looks at the doors again with anger in his face. He storms out and walks to Peter's locker. As he's trying to open it, it is then punched by Flash, who tells him not to go near his girl again. Peter says that he was just trying to help, but Flash tells him that he isn't a hero. Peter says okay, once again disheartened, and asks if he's done now, but this only makes Flash angrier. He punches Peter onto the ground and tells him to get up. By this point, tons of people are gathering around and watching, and also MJ walks by, asking him to stop. Peter gets up, and Flash punches him once again, and that's when Harry walks in, telling him to stop. Flash turns around, saying that the rich kid is gonna come stop him, asking if he brought his dad to come lecture him. Harry says to leave his friend alone, and Flash swings at him as well, but misses. Harry dodges multiple times before punching him into the ground. Where the teacher drops his lunch onto his face. Peter thanks Harry for the save, and his friend tells him not to mention it. The one kid that calls Peter a freaking cannon would actually praise Harry for being able to beat Flash. Since Harry is the rich kid and isn't necessarily cool like them, but also isn't Peter, he is welcomed rather than shunned. Harry then continues on to his class, and eventually when doing science or something, his webs comes out and stick to the thing he was touching. Remember that the Raimi trilogy did have the organic webs. Harry then notices that a weird web is coming out of him and sticking to something, and he tries to run out of the class as soon as he can to actually make sure nobody sees. He goes into an alleyway and gets the spiky hand thingies that Peter did, and then tries to climb the wall, and when he can, he runs across rooftops just like Peter does in canon. Harry is actually happy here because he sees this as a way to finally impress his father. Maybe this way, he could help him with his science work. He then tries to test the web, and eventually crashes just like Peter does. After this, Peter would be taking out the trash and talk to MJ just like in canon before she gets into her friend's car. Peter sees this and would also want to get a car very similarly to the movie. He looks in the newspaper and sees the wrestling ad and calls Harry. Peter asks if he can use his new strength to last 3 minutes in the ring to help him out with some money. Harry, of course, wanting to test his new abilities before showing them to his father to make sure that they're absolutely perfect, decides to do so. Peter is ecstatic and asks what he wants his suit to look like. Harry then thinks for a moment. "I'm thinking," he says while spinning in his chair, looking at the walls covered in webs since he had been practicing all day. "Spiders." We then fade into Peter drawing all the ideas for suits until he finally lands on the one that fits perfectly. Norman then reads the newspaper and Peter goes downstairs. Uncle Ben offers to drive Peter, and once there, since Peter hasn't done anything wrong, as he hasn't been bitten, this scene would be quite different. Instead, Uncle Ben would actually congratulate him on his grades, chores, etc. Basically just telling him how much of a great man he's becoming. He tells him that he needs to strive to stay this way, as with great power comes great responsibility. Peter is not actually angered by this, and instead thanks him, and says that he wouldn't be this way if it wasn't for them. Ben smiles, having been proud of his nephew, and stops, staying silent for a moment. "Now who is she?" he says, and Peter just awkwardly looks away before opening the door. "I'm gonna go." Ben laughs and says that he'll pick him up at 10 before driving away. Peter watches Bonesaw body someone before Harry walks up to him and asks if he has the suit. Peter gives it to him, and we then move on into them getting registered. The announcer would then announce "The Amazing Spider-Man" as next, and Harry would walk down the aisle into the ring. And that is when we would hear Bonesaw say the iconic line,
"I am a Christian."
No, that's the wrong one.
Bonesaw is ready.
And now the fight has begun. Harry would dodge, and the fight would mostly play out the same as it did with Peter, with him being overconfident and excited about his new powers. Meanwhile, Peter would be watching and struggles to see due to all the people in front of him. This leads to him not seeing Harry use his webs very conveniently. Harry would win, and everyone would cheer him on, including Peter. However, just like in canon, they would only be given $100 instead of $3,000 they were promised. Peter and Harry would see the crook robbing the guy and watch him run away. However, Harry would see this as an opportunity to get the full $3 grand. Harry tells his friend to come with him, and the two go in the elevator afterward. They run on the sidewalk, and that's when they see a crowd gathering. Someone had been shot. Uncle Ben. Peter sees him lying there and breaks down, with Harry feeling sadness as well and touching his shoulder to try and comfort him. They hear from the police where the guy is headed, and while Peter is crying, his friend tries to run after the guy. Now Harry does end up catching up to him and ends up beating him and sees that he's the same guy who they let get away. Harry feels horrible. He could have done something to stop him, but he chose not to out of anger. And now he was the reason Peter's uncle died. The man then trips and falls to his death. Harry, overcome with guilt, swings back home while Peter walks back to his own home. After this, the Oscorp testing scene happens, and then we move on to the graduation, and that all plays out the same. Instead of Peter becoming Spider-Man, after Aunt May's talk, we move into a scene about Harry once more. He walks into his father's room, knocking multiple times before Norman opens the door. This once again subtly shows just how much Harry has to do to get his father's attention. Norman asks what he needs, and his son says that he just wants to talk to him. Norman accepts this and allows him to sit down. The two sit, and Harry says that he doesn't know how to say this because it sounds crazy, but he has powers. Norman laughs, and Harry restates this by saying that he's actually being serious, and that's why his arms got way bigger out of nowhere. He then stands up, telling his father to watch as he shoots a web that pulls a glass of water into his hand. Norman's face turns to shock, but not out of fear. Harry smiles. "I know, right? That's not all either," he says as he jumps onto the ceiling. Norman says, "Oh my god," and Harry continues by saying that now he can finally do something to help in his research. Peter and MJ meet again outside of her job, and that scene pretty much goes the exact same. The next, however, would be much different. Harry would be in the lab with his father, working together when his phone continually rings from Peter calling. Norman would sample Harry's blood, and the two would actually be talking like a real family for once, having actual conversations. Harry is happy that he can finally make his father proud, and Peter, having now been shunned by Harry, tries to get a job at the Daily Bugle by taking pictures of random stuff, and he just barely lands a low-paying job, much lower than even in canon. So while it seems like Harry's life is going up, Peter's is just going down. Oscorp is then sold, but Norman is a bit more confident since he has been working with Harry. Skip up to the festival, and Peter sees Harry and MJ talking. This time though, Peter wouldn't sense the goblin, and once the goblin does show up, he would kill all of the board members. But when he comes near MJ, Harry springs into action, punching the goblin in the face. He grabs MJ and runs away with her, getting her to safety. After this, he swings home to grab his suit. He knew the glider and flight suit was stolen, so this must be the guy who took it. This means that he has to keep his identity hidden, otherwise he may come back to haunt him and his father. That would obviously be completely devastating since his father just had Oscorp sold, as well as since him and his father are actually bonding now. He doesn't want to lose that. He returns with the wrestling suit Peter made, and by this point, many people have already been killed, but he can still do something. He charges in to fight the goblin, but just gets body slammed like Peter did in canon. Now by this point, Peter has already ran away, as he took pictures before Harry returned, so no chance of him knowing Harry's identity. The two would battle, but eventually the goblin would escape, and Harry also never has to save MJ since he already did that. After this, Peter and Harry talk about what happened at the festival. We then get the Norman hallucination scene, but this time the goblin would be referring to Harry since he knows Harry's powers. The Green Goblin would never attack the Daily Bugle since he knows who Harry is, and instead we get a scene of Harry working on an actual suit. The current one is not made for actual combat, and it's torn to shreds after the fight with the goblin. While he's working, the goblin walks in. He looks at Harry, grabbing him by the throat. He tries fighting back, but ultimately can't. The goblin sets him down and begins telling him about his offer.
I know your secret, Harry. I know we can become far more powerful together. That's why I need you. And that's why you need me. We would be unstoppable and rule over the world.
What makes you think I'd do that? The goblin takes off his helmet and reveals Norman. Dad? Harry asks. But why?
I can't keep control,
Norman says before getting cut off by the goblin.
Your father and I have been working together, and we think you're the best new candidate. Like I said before, with our powers combined, we'd be unstoppable. The choice is yours, but just know that I know who you care for most.
The goblin finishes before flying off and putting his helmet back on. We get to see Harry standing there in complete shock before we move on to Peter and MJ meeting in the street when some crooks jump her. Peter decides to swing into action, but with only being a regular man, he can only do so much. He gets beaten down by the thugs, but both of them are saved when someone else arrives. Spider-Man. His suit design is a lot different than in canon. In fact, the reds are completely replaced with a green, and the blue is a gray. I wanted to change it up because obviously I wanted it to represent Harry, as Harry is much more different from Peter, and of course the green goes with the goblin theme and all that, so I wanted to at least give Harry some kind of difference, because I don't really see him picking red and blue, because those colors basically have no meaning to him. But anyway, Harry lands in, body slamming all the goons and easily saving them both. They thank him before leaving. No Spider-Man kiss or anything like that, which kind of sucks because that scene is amazing. But anyway, Peter is somewhat suspicious when it comes to the design. I mean, Harry told him he wanted his suit to be spider-themed back at the wrestling thing. But the designs are very different, and he never really saw Harry with powers. Plus, the two had been best friends for years, so he'd tell him if... Before he leaves though, Peter asks if he can get a shot of him, as people had heard about Spider-Man and what he did at the festival, so that might actually be able to give him somewhat of a raise. Of course, Spider-Man would agree, and Peter would take the picture. We then get to the building on fire scene, which would be Spider-Man's first real moment as Spider-Man that is acknowledged by the public. Last time he was in an off-brand suit, and barely anyone was there, But here, he's rushing straight in to save people. He goes in, fighting the goblin and urging for his father to take back control, but unfortunately, he cannot. The two fight it out, and once again the goblin escapes. The dinner scene would be a bit different since Peter isn't Spider-Man, and both Harry and Norman know each other's identities. Norman would use this time to humiliate MJ like in canon, but this time it's so Harry feels attacked by the goblin. If he wouldn't join him, he'll take everything away. The goblin would then convince Norman to strike at Harry's heart once more, as if he loses everything, he may consider joining them. He breaks into Peter and Aunt May's home, scaring them both and beating down Peter. This forces Peter to take Aunt May to the hospital, where he has the same scene with MJ, and Harry witnesses the two holding hands. He leaves, swinging across the city and stopping some small crimes, as he can't return home. He cannot be near his father. While swinging, he gets called. He looks at his phone. MJ. He answers to hear the goblin's voice. That's when we get to the bridge scene. Harry comes swinging in, ready to put a stop to the Green Goblin and finally free his father. Now, just like Peter in the original, he manages to save both MJ and the kids, and the goblin knocks him into the final battle set. Using a pumpkin bomb, he blows off Harry's mask. This fight would play out mostly the same, with the goblin having the edge at the beginning, but then it flipping to Spider-Man. When Harry begins beating him, Norman injects himself with Harry's blood, which he had sampled before, resulting in him also gaining the spider powers. His body would rapidly change, as the goblin serum and spider blood fuse together, making something much stronger, the ultimate goblin. By this point, Harry is once again getting bodied, but he is much more skilled than his father is with these abilities, and he uses that to his advantage. Eventually, he is able to topple walls onto him, kick him into the ground, and stuff like that. But in the end, this is not enough for him to win. Once he has him beaten, the goblin offers him one last time to join him. "We're family, Harry. I'm your father." Harry then stands up, giving us his version of the I have a father scene. "You're not my father. You've never been there for me, even when I needed you, and that's why I'll never help you." The ultimate goblin then says, "Well, that's too bad," before kicking him through a wall. He throws a pumpkin bomb, but Harry is just barely able to swing it back at him. This does massive damage and results in him ending up on the ground once more. His last trick is to use his glider to kill Harry, but he jumps over it, resulting in Norman being killed by his own glider. "Harry, my son," he says before ultimately dying. Harry, barely managing to move after such a long and drawn out and very much more climactic fight than in canon, looks at his father in sadness. After all of this is done, he leaves his father there and heads back home, symbolizing that he no longer seeks his father's approval and no longer needs it either. He will become his own man, without his father. The funeral then happens, and Peter is actually able to accept MJ's love this time, and the two are now together, with Harry ultimately feeling left out. He was the one mostly responsible for Uncle Ben's death. He had to help kill his own father and accept that he never truly loved him. He doesn't get to be with MJ, and he can barely stay friends with Peter with all this guilt and power he's been cursed with. The movie then ends with Harry swinging in his new, remodeled suit. And that is where we will end Spider-Man 1. The movie opens with Peter driving on a scooter, trying to deliver pizza. As he's riding, he would notice some kids about to get hit by a car, but luckily that's when he sees Spider-Man. The hero would swing past and save the two kids before then tapping on his wrist pad and calling his glider. He lands on said glider and then rides off. Peter watches as he flies away and smiles. After he delivers the pizza, we still get the iconic line,
"Pizza time."
However, this time the woman would just respond with a simple thank you. J. Jonah never threatens to fire Peter, and instead it's revealed to the audience that Spider-Man has been way more active than in canon. This is because throughout Spider-Man 2, Peter doesn't really want to be Spider-Man, whereas that is all Harry really has. Harry lost his father, pushed away his best friend because he saw himself responsible for Uncle Ben's death, and his crush MJ was now with said best friend. At this point, who he is really just the head of Oscorp and Spider-Man, not so much Harry anymore. He basically has been using Spider-Man to escape from his real life. Anyway, after all this, Peter arrives home to find Aunt May, Mary Jane, and Harry all there. They celebrate his birthday, They celebrate his birthday, but many small scenes would not happen. He wouldn't be late, he wouldn't tell MJ that it's been a long time since they saw each other, since, they're together in this timeline. And there also wouldn't be any tension with Harry. Instead, we would get some dialogue where Harry would apologize for not doing something sooner that night. If he had known what would have happened, he would change it all. Peter told him that it wasn't his fault and that they both made that mistake together. He went in for a hug, to which Harry did not accept, instead moving toward his chair. He sits down and tells Peter that he was working with Otto Octavius to help put Oscorp on the map once again. But this time, he did it for himself and not his father. He offers Peter to come, and his friend obviously accepted. He would then ask how MJ's plays are going, which he would respond that she's fantastic in the role, and that Harry should come with him to see one. The friends would smile together as MJ walks in with the cake, and after all this, we get Harry leaving and saying goodbye to everyone. Once the party is finished, MJ then leaves, and Peter doesn't have to take any money from Aunt May since he's been doing fine without Spider-Man. No big MJ scene, and instead Peter would go home to his apartment like in canon. Moving forward, Harry would give Peter to Octavius as he had some errands to run. The two would then talk, but Otto wouldn't comment about how Peter is lazy since he would be doing just fine in class. Once again, no Spider-Man, no negatives for Peter. They would still bond, and Peter would say that he does have a girlfriend, but he's kinda struggling to support their relationship as he has college and 2 jobs. Otto would tell him to stay strong through it all and make it work through all the problems. If you're there at the lowest points, it'll make the highest points all the more satisfying. Otto then tells him one last thing, make sure not to have any secrets. Peter would thank him and Rosie, and we would then cut to Harry in the board meeting. They would be talking about their newest military upgrades, and Harry would be barely paying attention. A member would ask him his thoughts, and he would give them a talk about how they just have to keep improving the city, as the crime rate just keeps on dropping. Their collaboration with the government would also help them expand to other cities as well, so they just have to keep up the good work. That's when one of the board members would say that the work they've been doing was great and all, and they were happy to see the improvements. However, it was taking a massive toll on their family life. It seemed like they were more businessmen than people these days. This would of course serve as a direct mirror to Harry, as he had been trying to escape from being himself. Harry goes silent, looking off for a second before saying, "Right," and then ending the meeting. He goes outside the office, and we cut to Peter on his scooter driving to MJ's play. Behind him would be a car speeding over the limit and about to hit him. However, he gets pulled into the air and the scooter gets trampled. Peter would be scared and would land on the ground, seeing Spider-Man zoom by. Spider-Man would easily stop the criminals, and it would actually be a similar car takedown to in the PS4 game. Peter would then run up to the hero, thanking him and asking him to get a quick picture. Spidey would agree, and Peter would then take the picture and ask him about how he manages to balance his lives out, and Spider-Man would go silent. Peter would then say that it's okay and that he respects his privacy, going on that he has to see his girlfriend's play, and Harry would then remember. Spider-Man would web sling away as Peter would be told that his scooter was going to get towed. We would then cut to Harry dropping his suit into the glider, which holds it and flies to Oscorp. He would then go to the rooftop and go through a window, dropping down into a seat as the play began. Meanwhile, Peter would be denied by Bruce Campbell and would go home. MJ would see Harry in the crowd, and he would be smiling, actually feeling happy for once in a while. He finally had the chance to be Harry and not Spider-Man or Mr. Osborn. After the play, MJ would walk out with Harry, and the two would talk about how things are going. MJ would say that Peter's been struggling with all his jobs and school, and her. Harry would respond that he's been struggling a bit too, and she replies that, yeah, she's noticed. She thought that it must be why he stopped talking to them. To her. Harry apologized, and MJ forgave him. She was just glad he was there tonight. She then got into a cab and went home, and Harry stood on the sidewalk thinking. We would move into MJ getting home and stepping out of the cab, and Peter would already be there with a flower and would apologize. He couldn't make it in time because he almost got ran over and Bruce Campbell stopped him. MJ would of course tell him that it's okay and just to try not to get ran over next time. They would kiss, and she would ask if he wanted to come inside, but Peter would say that he had to go to the Oscorp showcase tomorrow morning. MJ would say alright and begin to walk away, but Peter would stop her. Peter would then tell her that he's been told that it wasn't good to keep secrets from the one you love. MJ would ask what it was, and Peter would then say, Uncle Ben. He would confess to her everything that happened on the night of his murder, and that he was also responsible for it. MJ would say that she was so sorry, and that it wasn't his fault, but Peter would admit that it was. He's mostly over it, although it does still impact him, and he feels like he needs to tell the most important people in his life. He swore to never make the mistake of not acting again, and Mary Jane would then hug him. She would thank him for telling her and also say that he might want to tell Aunt May too. Peter would respond that he doesn't know if he has the strength, and MJ would be understanding of that. It probably took enough already just to tell her, and she wasn't even involved in any way. MJ would say goodnight and she would close the door, cutting to the experiment the next day. Harry would be late instead of Peter, and the presentation would then begin. Otto would of course succeed, however things would then go wrong like in canon and everyone would run out. He would then put on his suit and swing by using his arm blades to cut the plug, with Octavius trying to stop him. However, eventually he would succeed and Otto would be shocked and pass out. Of course, Rosie would die just like in canon, and after all that we'd get Otto waking up and the arms killing all the doctors just like originally. So J. Jonah Jameson would be reporting on Doc Ock's story and would praise Peter for taking a couple pictures of Spider-Man while that happened. He didn't usually get many good shots of him, as he typically got more normal pictures, which is why his job was barely still there. But with the praise, Peter may actually begin to move up a little bit more. Jonah would then tell him of his son's party thing, and Peter would want to go with MJ to take pictures and to have a good time. He would then go to the bank with Aunt May trying to get some extra money, but that's when Doc Ock would begin robbing said bank. However, Peter would not run off because he has to stay to protect Aunt May. A few minutes would pass without any action from Spider-Man until he finally arrives. He would then take on Ock, however it would go much better than it did for Peter in canon. Harry would be able to use his glider and dodge the money bags easier, as well as being able to hit Doc Ock with it and stuff like that. He would then try escaping and would go to grab Aunt May, however he would see Peter Parker standing in front of her. Peter would look at Otto in pity and confusion, but Otto would just simply try to escape. He's having second thoughts about taking Aunt May, and so he just decides not to. Harry, however, was not willing to let a big villain like this escape. He would chase after him, and the two would continue fighting, however Harry would not be able to keep up in this battle forever. Doc Ock at this point was just simply too much for him to handle. Ock would then grab Spider-Man's glider and smack him with it using the arms. This would lead to Spider-Man falling off the building, and soon his glider would fall too due to Otto throwing it down. The villain would then finally escape, and Harry would barely save himself by webbing the wall and swinging on top of the glider. We would then move into Peter at the party with MJ, and they would be enjoying themselves. However, MJ would notice something about Peter. She would be worried, asking if he was alright, and he would respond that he was fine, it's just that Dr. Octavius tried to attack him and Aunt May. It would be pretty traumatic, as this is the third time something like this has happened. Uncle Ben was shot, the Green Goblin attacked them both, and now Octavius, one of his idols. MJ would say that she was sorry and would hug him, and he would note that at least he still had her. Just then, Harry would come walking in, smiling at Peter. He would talk to both he and MJ about the party, and they would tell him that they're glad they could see him again. Harry would respond, "Yeah, Oscorp's been taking up most of my time since everything happened." Peter would remark that he could always try taking a break sometimes, but Harry would say that he uses the extra time for other business. Mary Jane would then ask Peter to go get them something to drink, and he would do so. Now that they were alone, MJ would say that she was glad Harry came to her play, but he has to try and make more room for them. She hates seeing Peter and Harry not acting like they did before. They were best friends, and a big part of it is because of their separation. MJ would say that Peter needs him, and she needs him too. Peter would come back with the drinks, and she would tell him that she wanted to go over there, pointing somewhere else. He would tell her alright and would say that it was nice to see Harry again before then leaving with Mary Jane. Harry would have a confused and depressed look on his face, running his hands through his hair and looking around before heading toward the bar. He would ask for a drink and then begin taking sips. Peter, meanwhile, would just be trying to enjoy his time with MJ, dancing with her as they talk about Harry. He would go in for a kiss when he would hear someone yell his name. Jonah told him to get his camera out and begin taking pictures of his son, and so he would then have to stop and do so. Harry would look up, seeing MJ standing there awkwardly while Peter took pictures. He noted this before then putting his glass down and walking out. Upon doing so, he would begin to swing through the city and think about some things. He sat on top of a building and took off his mask. Harry would then begin talking to himself about everything that's been happening. He needs more time for his friends, for himself, but he just doesn't know how to find the balance. It feels like running Oscorp and being Spider-Man are too much to handle when you only want to be yourself too. He moved on from needing his father's love, but he knows that he hasn't moved past the guilt of Peter's uncle. Even after all this time, those moments still linger in his head. He could have saved him. Peter forgave him, of course, but he can't forgive himself, and to make things worse, Peter has MJ. He has someone to help him with the grief, and he seems to have gotten over it just fine, but why? Why can't he just let it go? He looks at the mask in his hand and clutches it tightly, scrunching up his face in anger and sadness. He knew that he had to put it back on. He had to keep on helping the city, as it was his duty as Spider-Man. But when he puts it back on and jumps, no webs. He falls into an alley. Harry takes off the mask once again and is now scared and angry. He tries webbing again, sticking to the wall. Nothing. Harry then thought of everything. These powers. Spider-Man was what was ruining his life. With these powers gone, maybe it was a blessing. Without them, he could finally move on because he would be someone else. Not the amazing Spider-Man like Bruce Campbell said all that time ago, but just Harry. Harry wasn't the one responsible for Uncle Ben's death. He then looked down at his hands covered by the suit. It was him. He took it off, throwing it in the trash, and walking home. Now, we wouldn't get him walking through the town happy or anything, but we would instead get a montage of everything he's doing without Spider-Man. He finishes a board meeting by letting everyone go home for a day, to which they all cheer. He takes some pills and then follows them with water, before shaking his head a bit and smiling. He calls MJ and asks if she's free sometime, and then does the same for Peter. Bernard says that he's going to pick up some things for the store, but Harry takes the list and walks by, telling him that he's got it. He would then be walking home when he would see some cop cars pass, to which he would just keep on walking. We would then switch the scene over to Peter and MJ. MJ would be telling Peter that he had to do it. He had to tell her, and Peter would agree, but he just didn't know if he had the guts to. She would then kiss him and tell him to
go get him, Tiger.
Peter knocked on the door to May's home and walked in, telling her everything. May was, of course, upset by this like in canon and would walk away. This would leave Peter feeling even more guilty, but he knew it had to be done. He walked out to see MJ and she would ask how it went. Peter would then look at her before shaking his head, and she would comfort him. Moving on, we would see Harry sitting on his balcony, smiling with a drink in hand and just enjoying the view of the night sky, something he hadn't been able to do in a long time. However, that was when Doc Ock made his presence known. He would grab Harry and force him to give him the tritium. Harry did so, not being able to fight back because he lost his powers. However, just before he actually does give it to him, he instead agrees to make a deal, knowing that he couldn't just hand it over to Ock. Harry would tell him that he would give him the tritium if he brings Spider-Man to his house alive. However, Doc Ock would ask where he can find him, to which Harry would respond that he doesn't know. He would leave to hunt down Spider-Man, and Harry would sit on the ground, somewhat laughing in both fear and happiness. He thought that this was the perfect plan, have Otto running around looking for someone who will never show up. That way, he never finishes his experiment, the city is saved, and Harry can just keep on living his normal life. The first scene we would get in this part is the scene of Peter and MJ's date, only this time it wasn't actually a date. Harry would walk through the store's doors and would hug Peter, asking how they've been. This would of course come as a shock to Peter since at the beginning of the movie he denied a hug from him. However, him and MJ would then tell him how they are and ask Harry the same thing. Both he and MJ would tell him how they are and ask Harry the same thing. He would say that he's never been better, and Peter would then choose to ask how things at Oscorp are. However, Harry would think for a sec before saying that he doesn't know. Peter would smile, remarking that he always tells him the details, to which Harry would smile back and say that he guesses it just slipped his mind. MJ would be happy to see that Harry isn't all caught up in his work and that they can all be good friends once again. However, that's when the glass would shatter and the three would look outside to see Doc Ock. He would grab Peter with one of the arms and ask him where Spider-Man is. Peter would say that he didn't know, but Otto would show a newspaper from the Daily Bugle with a picture of Spider-Man. Peter would then be scared, saying that he didn't know, he had barely taken any pictures of Spider-Man, and Harry would say that it was true. Ock would then realize what he had to do. He would pick up MJ with another of the arms, to which Peter would start trying to attack, but of course would fail. Peter would yell that he talked to Spider-Man once outside of MJ's play, and that he found his suit in the trash, but that was all he knew. And Harry would tell Otto that he doesn't have to do this, this was literally all they had on Spider-Man. He then left, leaving Harry alone. He tried chasing after, but one of the arms just smacked him aside. And this led to Harry bursting out of the rubble and regaining his spider powers. He would then steal the suit back from J. Jonah Jameson and would use it, swinging through the city once again. This led to the fight on the train with Doc Ock, only now it was a bit easier for Spider-Man to keep up. With his glider, he could do a lot more to contend with Otto without having to worry so much about falling off the train. Eventually, Ock would leave, but Harry would pull out a tracking device from the glider. He throws it at Ock, making the glider follow. Harry is then forced to break his limits to stop the train with all of his power. This leads to all the people on the train saving him and realizing just who he is. Now this scene wouldn't be the same as in the original because Peter was just some average guy that none of them recognized. But Harry Osborn is a big name, they all know him. But while we wouldn't get the "he's just a kid" line, I think we would get something more akin to how maybe one of them thought Oscorp was a sellout. Perhaps they thought that Harry specifically wasn't cut out running Oscorp with the legacy his father left. Big business is bad and all that stuff. But if he's really out here saving lives, protecting people, fighting while still running Oscorp, he has to be commended for that. Harry would wake up and immediately freak out, grabbing for his mask. He would look at all the people as the little boy hands it to him. They would say that they wouldn't tell anyone, and so he would put it back on. Ock would then return with Spider-Man's glider in hand, throwing it onto the ground. He would smile and then seize the hero, locking him up in Harry's home. However, he would grow very bored of waiting. Harry would never arrive, and so because of this, Otto would find Bernard, forcibly asking where he was. Bernard would of course say that he didn't know, and this would make Ock even more furious. Eventually, Harry would wake up, and being inside the suit would break out of the binds. He would yell at Ock to leave Bernard out of this, but this would only make the villain more angered. Doc Ock would scream out, asking where Osborn was while threatening Bernard, and that's when Harry would yell that he was right here. Otto would be confused, and Spider-Man would take off his mask, revealing Harry Osborn. Ock would be shocked, but would smile, saying that he should have known. He decided not to get into a monologue and keep it brief, threatening Bernard once more, telling Harry to give him the tritium. Harry would do so, leaving Ock to drop Bernard onto the ground, and he would take it out of his hand and throw Harry to the wall. He then grabs things from all around the room using the arms, throwing them all at Harry, and as he leaves, he tells him not to follow. Now that he was gone, Bernard would help Harry out of the rubble, because he would be weakened from everything that happened previously, and getting off guarded didn't help. Harry would sit there, saying that now Bernard knows. He knows why he had to cut meetings short, why he neglected him, everything. Bernard would tell him that none of that matters now, and that Harry or not, the city needs Spider-Man. He would then hand him his mask, and Harry would smile. He would take it, putting it on once again, and standing up. Spider-Man would jump out of the side of the building, and we would cut to him sneaking into Otto's new lab. He quietly began freeing Peter, but this didn't go very well as Otto knew he was there. Spider-Man would yell, telling him that he got what he wanted, so now he needs to let them go. However, Ock would respond that if he did, he wouldn't have any leverage. Harry would be trying his best to free Peter, but Doc Ock would be cutting him off at every turn. Eventually though, Harry was finally able to catch Ock off guard and hit him, before then freeing Peter. Peter would try to save MJ while the hero and villain continue to fight. Otto once again beats Harry, although it is somewhat close. He grabs him by the throat and reveals his identity to Peter and MJ. The two would be shocked by this, but would have no time to think. Harry would be struggling to break out of Otto's grip, realizing that it just wasn't possible. However, that's when MJ and Peter both came swinging in with random stuff that they found and catch Otto off guard, letting Harry go. Ock would see Peter fighting against him, and the arms would grab him, almost killing him. But that's when Otto thinks back. This is Peter Parker. Peter would then tell Otto the things that both he and his aunt told him like he did in canon, and this would make Otto remember who he is, finally taking control of the arms and sacrificing himself to stop his own creation. Harry would escape with his two friends, and they would all sit on a web together. Peter says that everything all made sense now, why he was so late, why he missed things. Harry would stop him. It's not just that, Peter. I know I'm the one responsible for Ben, and I can just barely bring myself to... Peter would cut him off, hugging him, saying that it's okay. MJ would then also join in the hug just as Peter begins to speak. He thanks Harry, and the hero would ask for what. He would then respond, for being my best friend. After this, it would cut to Harry letting the two down and would swing into the distance. He would be alone at his home and would begin to take a seat, but Bernard would walk into the room. He tells Harry that he's gonna want to see this, and Harry slowly follows him into the secret room with all of his father's work. The movie would begin with Peter watching Spider-Man swing on a TV. He smiles knowing that it was his friend, and this wouldn't be a good moment to show his arrogance. The camera would show him smiling before cutting to Harry watching his own swinging on TV inside his home. Bernard would bring him brunch and would say that he had a couple things on his resume for today. He would then walk off, and Harry would call to him and say thanks. Peter would then get the same short scene introducing Gwen Stacy before cutting back to Harry. We'd then get a bit of Harry at a meeting, closing off a speech with someone asking him a question about stocks, and he would answer back with a joke. This would make everyone laugh, and he would walk out of the room saying that he'd see them all tomorrow. Then it would transition into Peter buying a ring and going to MJ's play. That scene would be going the same as in canon, only Harry would be watching MJ rather than spying on Peter. The two would then meet up after the show, with Peter saying that he was planning on proposing to MJ. This would stun Harry for a sec, asking Peter if he was serious. His best friend would say yes, and Harry would smile, telling him that it was great. He then told Peter that he had to go, and wished him good luck. The next scene would then go the same, with Peter and MJ talking, and afterward, we would see Harry in the secret lab of Norman Osborn. He would be working on improving his own suit and glider, but wouldn't want it to look too much like the Green Goblin. He would also look at the Goblin Serum, thinking about using it before ultimately putting it back down. Peter and MJ would then be sitting in the grass, looking at the stars. That scene would basically be the same as the original, just minus the webs. As the two ride home, a mysterious glob of black goo would climb onto the scooter. We would then get Flint Marko's introduction, and follow that with Peter telling Aunt May about his plans to propose. Because the fight between Harry and Peter doesn't happen, it would actually be replaced by Harry working on improvements. Bernard would come in, bringing Harry dinner, and reminding him not to spend too much time obsessing over his work. That's what his father did, and he wants to make sure that doesn't happen. Harry would say that he wouldn't, and Bernard would then walk out. Flint Marko would become trapped in the sand, and that goes about the same with him finally becoming Sandman. The scene that follows is Bernard walking into the secret room to give Harry his dessert, finding him asleep on the floor. He then covers Harry in a blanket before putting dessert in the fridge. After that would be the birth of Sandman, and I know this sounds like we're moving really fast, but that's because A, this movie is fast-paced, and B, the Harry amnesia thing takes up a lot of screen time, so without that happening, it's hard to make extra scenes that would fit within the story. But some smaller scenes I would place, instead of the hospital moments, would be Peter taking some pictures in the city, MJ thinking about Peter, Harry, and her acting role, as well as maybe a new Ditkovich scene with Peter coming home after talking to Aunt May. And after the transformation of Sandman, it would be followed by MJ talking to Peter. She tells him how nobody liked her performance, and he tried his best to comfort her. He would actually be more genuine than in the original though, since he isn't egotistical from all the praise of Spider-Man, since, well, he isn't Spider-Man. The two embrace before hearing the police report, leading to Peter grabbing his camera and telling MJ that he'd see her later. We'd transition into the train accident with Gwen Stacy, and Spider-Man would show up to save her, introducing Eddie Brock. Peter would also be there, and Spider-Man would specifically allow him to take shots of him. Eddie and Peter would then later meet and butt heads about the pictures of Spider-Man, with Eddie getting a job at the Daily Bugle. Peter and Harry have their little hangout, only this time there isn't any amnesia involved, so it would be less focused on Harry's memories. Instead, the two reminisce about their past and what the future has in store for them. Harry would tell Peter that Spider-Man was going to be getting a public celebration for all his hard work, and Peter would of course be happy for him. Harry then goes on about how he found his father's old stuff in an abandoned room, and how he also found the Goblin Serum he had used. Peter asked if he used any of it, but he says no. Harry then begins to talk about his bad experience with love, and Peter would ask him what he means. His friend responds that Peter has a girl that he's about to get engaged with, while he hasn't gotten with anyone since high school. Peter says that it couldn't be too hard, and then tells him that there's a nice girl named Ursula who lives next door to him. He could try to hook them up sometime. Harry would laugh a bit and the two would keep walking, and Peter would then ask, "What about the girl you saved today? Gwen Stacy. She's the daughter of Captain Stacy." Harry thinks for a sec, and the two would talk a bit about her father. I guess, maybe, but what if she finds out? Peter would say that he's confident he could handle all that somehow. I mean, he kept him in the dark for 2 years. The friends laugh once more, continuing their hangout. MJ then goes to her workplace, where she finds that she has been replaced, and we then get to the celebration, and Peter would be enjoying it along with everyone else before MJ arrives. Once she does though, the two would talk about MJ's replacement, though Peter would try to take her mind off of it while they enjoy her time. Harry would also be sitting atop a building, smiling as he watches everyone celebrate, all for him. However, Sandman would be looming nearby. Harry would see the announcer and would look to see that it was Gwen Stacy. With this, he gets a little nervous, but convinces himself to keep his cool. He is Spider-Man after all. Gwen then calls out Spider-Man, and Harry swings down, accepting the key to the city. However, it doesn't end there. The crowd begins yelling for Gwen to kiss the hero, and Peter, knowing what was about to happen, would laugh a little. Harry would tell Gwen to do it, and she would pull down the mask a bit so the two could kiss. Peter would be hyped about this along with the crowd, and would encourage MJ to smile. Unfortunately, there wouldn't be much to smile about, as the Sandman appears. Spider-Man sees this, and heads off to battle him. The two would have the same scuffle inside the truck, but since he doesn't have access to his glider, Spider-Man would lose. After his defeat, Harry would reflect on the battle, and we see Mary Jane and Peter having their dinner. Peter would be trying to make his advances, and MJ would be enjoying her time with him, though thoughts of her replacement still remained in the back of her head. Gwen Stacy would then walk up, saying how Peter is her lab partner. As she talks, Peter would message Harry telling him to pull up, as this was his only chance he could really meet Gwen. MJ seeing Gwen talking to Peter, and then him being on his phone, would make her feel worse. She chooses to leave after Gwen walks away, although she apologizes and says they could meet another time. This leaves Peter with the failed plan, and so he takes the ring and returns home. Later that night, Harry would arrive at the restaurant hoping that he wasn't late. He found himself a seat, and Gwen began walking up to him. She asked if he was No, he isn't. She asked if he was Harry Osborn, and he responded that he was. She smiled at him, remarking that she got to see 2 people she recognized in one night. Harry would then ask who the other person was, and she says it was her lab partner, and Harry would ask if it happened to be Peter Parker. Gwen said yes, and he responded that he's actually his best friend. She said that that was cool, and he said that if he knew he would be here, he would have come sooner. Gwen tells Harry that Peter was actually there with his girlfriend, and he would smile, saying, "You know how that stuff is." She would laugh a bit, saying yeah, and she would then say that she had to get back to her family. But Harry would ask if she had any extra room, as he really didn't have anyone to eat with, and he could pay for meals at the end. She said sure, and the two then sat with the rest of Gwen's family. They would have dinner, and Harry would get a chance to learn more about the Stacys and make the best impression he could. The next day, Peter calls MJ and she apologizes, and the two would make plans for a later date. It is then when Captain Stacy would call Peter, telling him to come to the police station. Peter and Aunt May would then learn more about Uncle Ben's death, and that Flint Marko was the true killer. This would reignite past feelings from Peter, because at that point he had moved forward with his life, but knowing that Uncle Ben's killer was the wrong guy, and he was still out there, was simply too much. Of course, Peter wouldn't lash out as much as the original, so when MJ shows up, he explains to her what happened and how he's feeling. She tells him that she's sorry before hugging him, and Peter says that he just needs time alone right now. MJ then leaves, and Peter then goes to sleep. And that is when the symbiote finally does something. Peter would wake up on top of a building, covered in the symbiote. He would have a similar scene as in canon, just with a lot less web slinging since he was still just Peter. He would have this thing tested by Dr. Connors later, and after hearing about the activity of the Sandman, he would put the suit on once more and go after him now that he had the power. Meanwhile, Harry was working on his father's material, so he didn't hear about the sightings of the Sandman. Peter would be about to go into the sewers when Eddie Brock would show up, taking pictures of him as maybe a new villain sighting. Peter wouldn't see him though, since he would be trying to stay hidden if it could have been a villain. Peter would then go into the sewers and find Sandman attacking him. However, while original Peter kept up with him in the fight, this Peter doesn't have the amp from the spider powers and is also a bit less emotional than the original. So this would make this Peter a lot weaker than in canon, so he would get bopped by Sandman and would only land a few good hits. The two would eventually make their way to the area with the thing filled with water, and Peter would try pulling it open but would only manage to open it a bit before getting punched by Sandman, knocking him off the wall. Here, the suit would begin to morph its face a bit and screech, but Peter would begin to fall unconscious. Sandman would then escape, and in the morning, Peter would wake up in his bed. Peter takes it off and locks it up, but thinking back, he knows that the Sandman is still out there and that he beat him, which just makes Peter more angry. This brings him to the point where he's about the same as he was in canon, just minus the ego. We then cut over to Harry, who gets a call from Gwen. She decides to pull up to his house, and so the two basically have a similar scene to MJ and Harry in the original, although it is a lot less friendly, and also doesn't have the kiss. I mean, the two just met after all. After this scene, Peter would try to call MJ, and would get a similar scene with Mr. Ditkovich and Ursula, but without the apology. Cutting back to Gwen and Harry, Gwen would eventually choose to leave, and Harry would accept this, hoping that he would see her again. We would then move back to Peter, who was sitting by the radio waiting for an update on Sandman, but nothing comes. Becoming impatient, he gets an idea, and after hearing the news of a small crime, he reopened the box with the symbiote. Peter would arrive at the Osborn house, sneaking past Bernard and finding the secret room. He went inside, looking around and taking the goblin serum. He would hold it out in his hand, thinking on if he should take it or not, before hearing someone say his name. Bernard had walked in, and Peter said that it wasn't what it looks like. The old man asked what he was doing, and Peter would just walk by and leave. When Harry returns, Bernard would tell him that Peter had snuck in and taken the serum, as well as some parts. Harry knew that he couldn't just let this happen, and so he headed to Peter's apartment. His friend opened the door, with Harry having a sort of smile before cutting to the two walking at night. Harry began to confront Peter, saying that he knew he took the stuff, but Peter would tell him that he didn't understand. Harry says that he wants to understand, and so he has to communicate, and Peter tells him that his uncle's real killer is the Sandman. And now he knows he wasn't strong enough to fight him. He tried, but wait a minute, you tried? You're lucky to be alive, why are you trying to do it again? Peter tells Harry that he knew he wouldn't get it before walking off, but Harry grabs his shoulder. Peter's neck began to get covered in the symbiote, and Harry took a step back as he got fully covered. Peter told him that he should go, but Harry insisted that he wanted to help him. His friend would tell him alright and would offer him to come with him, but Harry said that he didn't want to endanger his friend. Peter then began running, and Harry shot a web at his back and then at a rooftop, pulling them both up. Harry would warn his friend that this didn't have to happen, but Peter said that it was too late. The two then fought, punching and blocking each other's attacks. Harry would try his best to overpower Peter without hurting him, but Peter was going full throttle. He knew Harry could take the hits, so he just kept him coming. Harry realized this and soon began to fight harder, punching Peter in the face so hard that the symbiote tore off his cheek and then latched back on, screeching. Peter slashed at Harry, cutting his shirt, and Harry webbed a nearby piece of metal at Peter's head, but the symbiote extended itself, grabbing it and throwing it at Harry. The hero jumped up, dodging with Peter running under him and jumping to the next building. Harry would follow, doing his best to keep up in the chase, and eventually he would be able to web two objects and launch himself down the middle, kicking Peter in the back. This sent him flying onto the next roof and hitting a wall. Harry would walk up to his friend, telling him that he should have listened, but that's when the symbiote shows its true form, screeching at Harry. The symbiote then cuts his cheek and punches him off the building, falling onto the sidewalk. Peter ran away as Harry lied there, and by this point, he wasn't sure what to do. He could follow Peter, but where would he take him? There wasn't a likely chance of him finding Sandman. He then decided to just head back home and get ready for another encounter. He really did not want to fight his best friend, especially with their relationship being so good now, but he has to protect the city, and he has to try and save him. He began working even harder on his upgrades, trying to be prepared just in case he has to fight Peter or Sandman again. He had basically lost to both of them, so he definitely needed to get prepared. Peter also returned home having the infamous door scene, and he would then begin working on the small parts that he stole from Harry before going to the Daily Bugle and exposing Eddie for his doctored photos. MJ later shows up at Peter's house expressing her worry about Peter, and Harry would tell her that he had gotten powers. He had also stolen his father's serum and is currently looking for Sandman. He had already fought him once. She would break down in shock of these statements, and he would promise her that he would get him back, and MJ would go back to Peter's apartment, finding him shooting some water at the wall. She asks what he's doing, and Peter tells her that he was just working on some stuff. Mary Jane tells Peter not to lie to her and tries her best to urge him away from this, saying that the serum made Norman go insane, but Peter resists. He tells her that he loves her, but that this is important to him. This guy killed his uncle, became a big villain, beat him up, and now Harry wants to stop him even though he's the reason Uncle Ben. He then stopped himself. MJ asked him if he even knew what he was saying, and he told her that he had to do this. He had to at least bring him in, and then he'd be done, because Harry clearly couldn't do it. MJ persisted with begging Peter, but he just couldn't listen. She told him that they couldn't be together if he was going to be like this, and he responded, "Then go." She felt rejected and unheard, and so she left him. Peter of course felt bad about this, but he had to keep going. She had practically stood him up on their date and led to them not getting engaged anyway. What he was doing now was far more important than anything he had done before and anything that is currently happening in his life. He had to keep pushing, and he could fix things after he dealt with this. Speaking of which, he now injected himself with a small portion of the serum. We then see Sandman walking down an alley when he is attacked from above. The two began their struggle, and Peter put his fingers in a Spider-Man style before spraying water all over the Sandman. Flint, although it wasn't that much, was still feeling the effects of this, and so he tried running off, but Peter continued his chase. The two began another brief battle that once again ended in Peter spraying him some more, and by this point, Sandman was falling apart and couldn't properly fight back, so Peter took advantage of this, landing many blows onto him. Flint tried transforming into sand to escape, but Peter just drained the rest of his shooters, turning him into a pile of mud. He then felt at peace, returning home once more. Cutting back to Harry, he had finally finished working on his new suit, and it was much more durable, having upgraded armor and blades. It also somewhat resembled the big-time stealth suit from the comics, so there's that. But anyway, Harry would now search for Peter to hopefully stop him before he does anything drastic. It takes some time, but he manages to find him the next night and appears behind him. He urges his friend to stop before he does something drastic, but Peter turns around with a crazed face. It is then that Harry's worst fear has come true. Peter had taken the serum that ruined his father. You can still come back from this. You just need to take that suit off. No! Peter yelled while lifting his arm up. He told Harry that this was his last chance for the two of them to work together on this. They could stop all crime and not let anyone else be hurt the way he was. But Harry tells him that he couldn't do it that way. Peter has two different things clouding his judgment at once, and they're making him unstable. Maybe if they go back to the lab, they could— Enough! Peter screamed. If you're not with me, then I guess I'll have to take out both of Uncle Ben's killers. Harry was in shock at Peter. When he had previously forgiven him, now he's blaming him for Uncle Ben's death. This took any previous doubt away from Harry coming into the fight. Before, he was fighting his friend, but now he knows that he is not. I'm getting Peter back, he says before getting into his fighting stance as the battle begins. The two would attack, swinging and dodging each other's hits. They were roughly equal, with Peter having a bit of an edge, but Harry had more skill and tools at his disposal. He used his glider to carry out some saves when he fell, as well as shoot a bit of fire to scare the monster away. The rematch would be epic, with the two seeming to deal the same amount of damage to each other, but yet still continuing on. Eventually, Harry would be on his glider, and seeing no other option would take a pumpkin bomb, and no, he couldn't do it. He couldn't risk killing his best friend. But the monster attacked anyway, grabbing his glider and throwing it through a building, leading to Harry falling onto the ground. The monster walked over to him, making a blade out of his hand and preparing to stab him. However, it was a fake out. Harry grabbed his arm, pulling him to the other side and punching him in the back, knocking him away. He then pulled out the pumpkin bomb and threw it a ways behind the monster, and it exploded, dealing damage without killing him. Spider-Man then grabbed at the symbiote and began tearing it from Peter, but it resisted. Eventually, when he was finally pulling it off, Peter punched him in the face, trying to make him let go. Harry only continued pulling until finally the two were separated, with the symbiote running off. Peter begged for it to come back, but he fell unconscious shortly after. We would then see Eddie Brock at a church praying for Peter's death. The symbiote then snuck its way through and attached itself to Eddie, given that he had the most hatred in the nearby area and he couldn't go back to Peter as he'd just be torn off again and probably lose. This led Venom to now go and try to find Sandman, who is alive by the way. He survived like he did in the original. But basically, Eddie's trying to team up with him to kill both Spider-Man and Peter, since both of them have gotten in Sandman's way and both of them have shown Eddie up. The two make their alliance, with Eddie kidnapping Mary Jane. And at the same time, Harry would have been restraining Peter, trying his best to make some sort of cure, but nothing was working. He didn't have enough time. Peter woke up, telling Harry that he was sorry, but that it was too late to undo everything. He had already killed Sandman, he broke up with MJ, and now he fought Harry too. Plus, with the serum, Harry would say no, telling him that he would find a way to restore him. Bernard then walked in, talking to Harry and saying that he might want to come see this. He looked at the TV, and Peter broke out, coming to see it as well. They watched the news report that Mary Jane had been kidnapped by Venom and Sandman, who are now working together. Harry turned and started walking towards the lab, but Peter told him that he needed to go as well. It was MJ. He could take one of the suits, he could know Peter, but you can't beat both of them. Probably not, Harry said, picking up his mask. But I can damn sure try. God, that's so epic. He then got on his glider and flew off. Peter looked at Bernard, and the old man said that he knew Peter was right and that Harry wouldn't be able to win. But at the same time, Peter is unstable and could end up being a detriment. The two of them think as we transition into Spider-Man swinging and running his way to the battle. The whole crowd cheers for him as he enters into the fray. He uses his glider to turn some of the now giant Sandman into glass and then destroys it very similarly to how he did in canon, only now he's Spider-Man and not the Neo-Goblin. While dealing with Sandman, Venom comes from behind and leaps onto him, causing the both of them to fall into the building. Of course, alone, this amped Spider-Man could definitely take Venom and beat him, though not easily. However, Sandman was also using his giant arms to try and attack during the fight with Venom, which threw him off and led to him taking more damage than he should have. Spider-Man and Venom continue to clash, with the hero dealing more blows and dodging, but ultimately the combined efforts of both Sandman and Venom were too much. This led to Venom holding him down, while Sandman continued to crush him over and over again, and the mask would finally break off. Venom told Sandman to stop and now began looking at the hero's face. Harry Osborn. Guess that explains the suit, and the glider, and some other things. How didn't I predict that? But anyway, knowing who you are, that's gonna make it even more enjoyable for me. Venom would then go to stab Harry, but that's when Sandman would feel something in his neck. A pumpkin bomb. It would explode, and then a glider would come flying at Venom, launching him away. From that glider would jump Peter, wearing a goblin suit. He would help Harry up, and the two would now team up, fighting against Venom and Sandman, and winning pretty easily. They would perform combos similarly to in canon, just with role switches and certain new variations. Eventually, the fight would become fatal, and that is where I have to reveal to you guys that I have written 2 different endings to this movie. In the end, I just couldn't decide which one I liked more, so I just stopped thinking about it and put both down for you guys to decide yourselves. So anyway, let's start with ending number 1. Harry gets his arm stuck by Venom, and so Venom is about to stab him with the glider when Peter shows up, getting stabbed in the side. It isn't as bad of an injury due to the placement and armor he was wearing, but it was still enough to keep him down for a sec. Venom threw Peter into a bunch of metal pipes, and they all crashed, hurting Venom with the sound. Harry saw this and broke out of his restraints, beginning to use the pipes to hurt Venom more. He surrounded him like Peter did originally, and this led to Eddie being close to free. Harry webs Eddie's back, trying to pull him out, and that's when Peter also grabs Eddie's arm. The two continue fighting, however the symbiote was fighting back, and now it was beginning to attach itself to Peter. Harry shot a web at Peter, knowing that he couldn't save both of them, and so he let go of Eddie to pull Peter away. The explosion from the pumpkin bomb began to go off, killing both Eddie and Venom, leaving Peter in a critical state from both of his injuries. Harry and MJ both surrounded him, trying to assure him that he would be okay, but Peter knew his time was coming. The Sandman walked up and apologized, telling the true story of what had happened to Uncle Ben, and Peter would forgive him. He then told Harry that he was his best friend, before finally dying. Afterward, MJ and Harry would both do their own thing for a while, but Harry would make sure to check up on her. Meanwhile, he would be trying his best to compose himself before continuing to go out with Gwen Stacy. He would also make sure to never forget what Peter had done, and never forget that he was his best friend. He would continue living on his life as Spider-Man and protecting the city to the best of his ability. And that's the first ending. So now let's do the second ending. So we rewind time back to the fight with Venom, only this time Peter is the one who gets restrained, just like in the original. Venom attacks him with the glider, but Harry jumps in the way, getting stabbed. Peter screams out before breaking the restraints and using the metal pipes to beat Venom. He tries to save Eddie, but without the webs, it would be impossible. This leads to both Eddie and the symbiote dying in the explosion. Peter would go to Harry and he would apologize, but Harry would tell him that it was okay. Sandman then pulled up and apologized to Peter, telling him the true story of Uncle Ben's death, and Peter forgives him. They then have the same best friend moment before Harry ultimately dies. With this, Peter over time would manage to get himself together and stop the serum's effects. This is because we saw Harry in the final battle not being affected at all mentally by the serum, so it must wear off if you have a strong enough will. Peter would visit the Osborn residence frequently, trying to create something that could uphold the Spider-Man legacy. He knew that he had to make sure Harry didn't die in vain, and that someone would always watch over the city, just like he had done before. At the same time, he also tried fixing things with MJ, and the two would have the same slow dance, thus ending the film. So yeah guys, that was What If Harry Became Spider-Man, and this series is honestly one of my best works on the channel, and I am very proud that I managed to make something this good, using some of my favorite movies and characters. I went into the third movie thinking it wouldn't be very interesting because Peter didn't have any ego, so the symbiote wouldn't affect him as much, and Harry really didn't have anywhere interesting to go with his character. However, I think overall I managed to make a really good third installment to the series, and I hope you guys feel the same way. Let me know which ending you liked more and why in the comments, and just let me know how much you like this series. But as always, tell me if you liked this part, comment your requests for future videos, and subscribe. Thank you for watching, have a great day.
Also, I'm gonna just add this in, bro. Sleep. Ha ha.